Hi folks, Carl James here from Electric Media Madness. In this video I'll be reviewing episode 3 of Doctor Who's 12th season, an episode entitled Orphan 55. Let's start with a quick review of the plot before I jump into some analysis of the episode. In this story, Graham has been collecting vouchers that entitle him to an all-inclusive holiday break. The vouchers are assembled into a cube which transports the Doctor, Graham, Yaz and Ryan to the Tranquility Spa holiday resort. On arrival, we soon learn that there are some strange things afoot in the resort. There's a virus in the vending machines that infects Ryan. The Doctor steps in to remove the virus from Ryan, however his enforced recovery period allows him to meet another pre-infected guest at the spa, a girl named Bella. Next we learn there's been some sort of breach of the resort by violent creatures called dregs, who start attacking the guests. As the guests start getting picked off one by the dregs, the Doctor meets a woman named Kane, who is the head of the resort's security contingent. We later learn that Kane also built the Tranquility Spa. The survivors of the Dreg attack gather, and we are introduced to some other characters. An elderly woman named Vilma, who's fretting about her missing partner Benny, the spa's mechanic Nevi and his son Silas, customer host -3, and Kane's lesser-ranking security assistant Vorm. The Doctor, Graham, Yaz, Ryan, Bella and Kane are also in the mix at this point. The group learn that Vilma's partner Benny is still alive outside the enclosed dome of the resort. They decide to take a transport bus-type vehicle to go outside the dome to find and rescue Benny. The bus is eventually attacked by the dregs, and the group end up abandoning the vehicle. Benny is located, but he's shot dead by Kane, strangely at his request, to save him from a dreg attack. Bella and Ryan escape in the vehicle while the rest of the group take refuge from the dregs in a subterranean service tunnel. We learn that Bella is Kane's daughter, and that she has some mummy issues with Kane. She feels that Kane neglected and abandoned her to concentrate on building the resort. To get back at her, Bella reveals that she has bombs that she plans to use to blow up the resort. In the tunnel, the rest of the group are being pursued by the dregs. Vilma sacrifices herself to the dregs to give the others more time to escape. The group discover a sign in the tunnel that turns out to be written in Russian. They learn that they are in Siberia, on a post-apocalyptic Earth. They also learn that this happened as a result of, as the Doctor puts it, global warming, mass migration and war. A telepathic link between the Doctor and a dreg gives a vision of nuclear mushroom clouds and other doom-laden scenarios, leading to the revelation that the dregs are mutated human survivors of the apocalypse. The survivors return to the spa. Bella and Kane fight off the oncoming dregs while the Doctor and Silas repair the transport beam, allowing the survivors to escape to the TARDIS. The Doctor then gives a long-winded and preachy speech about humanity's future and how if people don't change their ways, it will all come to pass and humans will become the dregs. In the final shot, we see a dreg roaring at the camera. So when I initially started watching this episode, I was really getting these vibes of past Doctor Who episodes like Utopia and Midnight, and I really naively believed that we actually might be getting something good. Our first Doctor Who episode of the Chris Chibnall era that felt akin to some of the better Doctor Who of the post-2005 era. But it shows what I know, especially when you get your hopes up with these things. Initially, the episode descended into the standard current fare of lackluster acting, choppy plotting, frenetic editing, story pacing, that sort of thing. But it seemed it couldn't get much worse, but it suddenly did. It plumbed a new low in the final act, but that's something that I will come back to shortly. In the final analysis, I really struggled to find anything that I liked about this episode, other than the initial promise of the build-up of the mystery of what was going on at the resort. As I started making notes whilst watching this episode, my list of negatives just kept getting longer and longer. I'm not going to go through every tiny detail of what was wrong with this episode, things like the laughable effects of the dregs, that sort of thing. But I want to kind of stick to some key issues this episode that I have problems with. Most of them go back to the tired, old continual need for the current producers of the show to lob massive handfuls of superficially portrayed, poorly researched socio-political grandstanding at this era of Doctor Who. Inherently, I've never had any kind of problems with this in science fiction and fantasy. I grew up on Star Trek and Quantum Leap, morality tales of all that kind of thing. Some of it is very thoughtful, makes you think. Some of it, even if I didn't necessarily agree with it, I still appreciated the fact that it was being done. Because messages and morality tales inserted into this genre, they always work best if they're conveyed with subtlety and thoughtfulness. But metaphorically shouting and preaching endlessly at the viewer, bashing them over the head with a belief or worldview, it never works. Unless, of course, you've got more teeth than brain cells, but most sane people in the world will only take so much of this in their media. Eventually, they just reach for the remote, they turn over, they turn off, or even if they are watching mentally, they just tune out the proverbial noise, really. But there's two predominant political messages to this episode. One is identity politics, one is more generic politics, but I'll come to that in a minute. But the first is a contrived portrayal of certain doctrines of identity politics. Predominantly it's conveyed by the characters and their traits rather than the actual story of the episode. It's delivered in all manner of ways. We've got this weakness of the male's paradigm, which is conveyed by the likes of Benny's inability to commit to marriage to Vilma until he's very old and seemingly dying. Ryan's pictured sitting on the floor, sucking his thumb after he's infected by the virus. And then you've got Vaughn's gung-ho and woefully ineffective approach to defending the resort and the guests from the dregs. You've got Kane's flippant remark about "don't worry, I killed him" after she dispatches Benny. Or the fact that it's pretty much only Benny, the old white male, who's taken by the dregs. You've got the mechanic Nevy, who's apparently a technical moron, and his young son is intellectually far superior than, which is that conveys a less than subtle message that only the younger generation is smart. Or Graham being pretty much portrayed as a buffoon in this episode, something which is actually a recurring theme in season 12 so far. This list goes on and on and on. And there's another aspect to the episode, identity politics, barrage, which is how we perceive parental figures. Again, it's a popular trend in the Chibnall era of Doctor Who. We had it in season 11, and the theme there was predominantly to attack fathers, father figures and fatherly role models. But this season, that motif has actually been extended to mothers now as well. We've got very blatantly in part 2 of Spyfall, where Daniel Barton's contempt for his mother. But in this episode, we've got been portrayed by the Bella-Kane conflict. Initially, Bella talks about her mom being dead, which leads to Ryan's blasé remark about them both having dead parents. Then we have this reveal that Kane is actually Bella's mom and that Bella knew she was alive all along. And the laughable raison d'etre for all of this is when Bella states, "Oh, she never came to any of my birthdays," as if that's reason enough to hate your mom, declare her dead and build bombs to blow up her resort. So it's laughable, really. But there is another subtle nod to this theme in the episode, where you've got this idea of Mother Earth and how humanity, its children, are seemingly neglected and abandoned the Earth, as the Doctor puts it, and then they would turn it to the dregs, which is also a telling name, the dregs of humanity. Finally, we've got this new name for Earth, Orphan 55, which is like the orphan abandonment theme again. So we come now to the predominant elephant in the room of this episode. It's an elephant in the room for some people, at least, anyway. And it's this doctrine and message of anthropogenic effect, as in human activity, on the Earth's climate. Now, I will be the first one to admit that humanity really needs to have a far healthier and symbiotic relationship with the Earth. I absolutely agree with recycling waste and reducing or wholly eliminating those processes that add to the problems of waste and pollution. Also, and perhaps far more importantly, is that the global corporate manufacturing industry needs to curb its wide-scale pollution of the planet. All of that aside, all that said, media and mainstream depictions of those aforementioned issues are no longer being portrayed, discussed or dealt with in a sensible, level-headed way today, particularly in an evidence-driven manner. We have a fierce propaganda and indoctrination machine that's driving this whole concept of climate change and global warming. And I do note that climate change and global warming here is a contrived terminology that the mainstream media and academia uses. It's not generally a terminology that I would use, but I'm using the term here, obviously, in reference to its usage in this episode of Doctor Who. But the propaganda machine of climate phenomenon is obsessed with generating this wholly unwarranted level of panicking and fear-mongering. It is fear-mongering. And the net result of this is not really to create a better or ecologically healthier planet. Rather, it's to line the pockets of... It's a stealth tact. It's to line the pockets of mega corporate entities, moneyed elite types, that sort of thing. But it's also, much more deeply, it's a cognitively based programming people into this perception of the world that's not really based on quantifiable evidence, but it's based on media-conveyed soundbites and vacuous memes. And you only have to look at something like the Greta Thunberg phenomenon with your head screwed on the right way around to see this phenomenon at work. And at the end of this episode, this is where we come to the low of the episode that I spoke about earlier. And it comes in the last minutes of the episode. We have Jodie Whittaker's Doctor literally doing a Greta Thunberg. She's grandstanding to the viewer about how real, in inverted commas, anthropogenic climate change is, how imminent the danger is, how it's all our fault. I don't want to get on a counterpoint soapbox regarding the Doctor's speech here, but this episode really does demonstrate how real that propaganda is in the BBC and how, if nothing else, how unbalanced their argument is. There is so much information available on climate change issues that the BBC and the rest of the mainstream media willfully distorts or wholly ignores. One example alone, they never address how comparable climate change is going on amongst all of the planets in our solar system. And if climate change is wholly humanity's fault, how could we be affecting climate on Mars or Jupiter? But If you really want to learn more about these kinds of subjects, there's an excellent and accessible book out there available by Andrew Johnson. It's entitled Climate Change and Global Warming Exposed. I really cannot highly recommend that book enough. Please go and check it out. On a final note, I just want to mention the digs towards Russia yet again in this episode. It's shown that the nuclear war has been heavily responsible for the post-apocalyptic state of the Earth. One question here, what really does war have to do with climate change? I think about that one from the point of view of the nuclear exchange. Obviously, the nuclear exchange would have a catastrophic effect on the climate, but in this episode, the climate and war connection is extended to all kinds of warfare, not just nuclear. I understand the effect that nuclear war would have on climate, but this just generic warfare, how does that affect climate change? There's a subtly embedded connection to Russia here via the Siberian location of the resort that implies that Russia was presumably part of the nuclear exchange. And the BBC really does love to blame Russia for everything, really. Well, them and Trump and Brexit anyway. Tub thumping about nuclear wars, post-apocalypses, World War III. Again, fear-mongering tactics in the media nowadays, all the time. And it's a baseless fear-mongering tactic as well. And I did wonder about the coincidence of this episode airing just a week after the Iran World War III phenomenon paradigm was trending on social media. I know this episode was written and filmed way back, but I do believe there's more than coincidence sometimes with these things. That's just a thought. And I know there's going to be people out there accusing me of getting, as they might put it, political or even conspiratorial in this episode, but it was the BBC that laid down the gauntlet with this episode. I simply took it and gave it an alternative spin. It's important to do that kind of thing sometimes. I know that it's generally considered by most people to be only entertainment, Doctor Who, and that goes for a lot of TV programmes, but trust me, I have a wealth of verifiable evidence out there showing that the media entertainment system isn't always used just to entertain. When this happens, it's crucial that we highlight it. Overall, I wasn't that impressed by this episode at all. All of the aforementioned aside, it was a subpar story, hardly original, groundbreaking, or very predictable. The dialogue was boring, the characterisation was wholly superficial. I will give the episode a point for some initial potential that seemed to be there in the first 5 to 10 minutes, despite it being snatched away almost immediately. As a result, I am giving this episode an overall score of 1 out of 10. I'm going to be controversial here and say that it potentially is the worst episode of Doctor Who ever made. I know a lot of people are not going to like that, but there are some that come very close, like Fear, things like that. But yeah, initially, at this point in time, I do feel that way. So I hope you've enjoyed this little review, despite my take on the politics of the episode. My next review will be episode 4, Nikola Tesla's Night of Terror. Hopefully it'll be available very soon. I've been somewhat behind with these reviews lately. Life just seems to keep getting in the way of things, but I truly appreciate you checking out the videos anyway. Thank you again so much for watching. Please remember to like and share this video. If you like my content, subscribe to the channel. Also, don't forget to click the bell icon for notification of new content. And I will see you in the next video.